Yeah, now I finally pushed the button so you can hear me. Um, the If you have any questions during the class, feel free to type your questions on chat. I will see your questions and then be able to incorporate the answers into the ongoing shiur. You're not all from English-speaking countries. If it's easier for you to type in another language, on peut poser des questions en français. Se pueden hacer preguntas también en español, también en portugués. Man kann Fragen ruhig auf Deutsch stellen. Toje Poruski. I have a number of other languages if you want to correspond in a different language. Let's get started with the material and let it speak for itself. There are three principal issues that we have to touch upon. Number one, teaching Torah to non-Jews. In a moment, we're going to start that. Then we'll come to the question of the wine and the grape juice, which is handled by non-Jews. And finally, will be the issue of cooking for non-Jews on Yom Tov and inviting them to Suda. That's not; these are not specifically issues of Leil HaSeder, but these are issues which typically arise in Leil HaSeder when you have a non-Jew. First issue: what about teaching non-Jews Torah? Well, Rambam says, and I'm not going to bother mentioning the exact source that I draw the text from, because you have the exact source on the screen, Tshuva number 149. If you want to look up the original and see what my typing errors are, I'm not a good typist, feel free to check out here is what the Rambam said. Mutar lilamed ha-mitzvot l'notzrim u'lemoshcham el datenu. It's permissible to teach mitzvahs to Notzrim, to Christians, so as to draw them to our religion. The Eino mutar davar zeh liishmaelim, but it's prohibited to teach Muslims. Christians, you can teach Torah. Muslims, it's prohibited to teach Torah. Why? Lefi ma sheyadua lechem al emunatam, because it says the Muslims say in their religious books. That means in the Quran. It says Torah zo eina min hashamayim. The Quran explicitly denies the validity of the Torah. According to the Quran, according to Islamic religious tradition, the Torah is a ziyuf, is a forgery, and therefore not min hashamayim at all. That's very different from the Christian religious tradition. According to the Christian religious tradition, the Torah is correct. Just they understand the verses very differently than the way we understand the verses in the Torah, and it's correct to teach them the proper understanding of the Torah. And in the course of time, Mashiach will come, and they'll realize their mistake in their understanding of the psukim. That's okay. We have common ground to teach Christians Torah, because Christians are beginning, like us, by assuming the validity of the Torah. Muslims, on the other hand, who simply reject the validity of Torah, there's no common ground to speak about. And if you try to teach Muslims something from the Torah which contradicts their religion. Lefi irbuva sipurim bilbulim inyanim shebalehem, they have very confused idea. They have very confused ideas regarding biblical history, the relationship between Avraham and Yitzchak, the position of Yishmael in the story. They have changed all the elements of the stories in Chumash, and they simply reject our texts. Well, you can't prove anything to them, to the Muslims, on the basis of the Torah because they simply reject the authority of the Torah. Don't be dehem, and that's their mistake. They always explain the Torah according to their mistaken ideas. But the non-Jews, I'm going to turn off my picture for a moment to see if I can improve the quality of the sound. The Christians, on the other hand, who do accept the validity of the Torah, rak megalim panim beferusham mufsad mifashim beferushim. They just have an incorrect understanding of the verses. Well, im ya'amidu al perush nachon. If we can teach Christians the proper understanding of the verses, maybe we'll have a positive influence on them. And even if they don't, even if teaching them the correct meaning of the verses does not have a positive impact on them, we are not going to suffer because of this. Bottom line, Rambam has has two ways of relating to non-Jewish religions. The two ways that Rambam can relate to non-Jewish religions are, number one, by looking at them statically, looking at the non-Jewish religions as they are today. Alternatively, one could look at non-Jewish religions diachronically, how they develop over a period of time. And one gets very different approaches depending upon whether one takes a synchronic view of the other religions, looking at them frozen in one point of time, or a diachronic view, looking at them how they develop over a period of time. Christianity has the advantage, according to Rambam, of distributing publishing and distributing the Bible, Tanakh, all over the world. And that's a great advantage. True, they don't understand all the verses correctly, but in the course of time, eventually they will. And they've already gone far to promote the validity of Torah all over the world. That's looking at the religion in a historical perspective as they have developed. On the other hand, Islam, if one looks at the religion of the Muslimim, one sees that they rejecting the validity of Torah over a course of time. They've gone far to destroy confidence, worldwide confidence in the validity of Ma'amad Har Sinai, the validity of the Torah which we have. So over a period of time, Christianity is doing a better job than Islam is doing as far as spreading ideas of religion all over the world. On the other hand, Rambam was among those who held that Christianity has strong elements of idolatry in it, and therefore, looking at the religion as it is today, we don't like it because of the idolatrous elements in it. Islam, on the other hand, which is purely monotheistic, Rambam had great respect for the monotheism of Islam, and that's very praiseworthy. So if you look at it in one point in time, Islam comes out much better than Christianity. If you look at them developmentally, as they progressed along a period of time, it turns out that Christianity has certain advantages over Islam. Well, this is Rambam's approach. One could go much further in discussing different attitudes of different rabbis in different times and places to various non-Jewish religions. That's not our purpose tonight. What we have learned is that according to Rambam, Christians can be taught the meaning of the verses. That's a good idea. Muslims should not get involved in these discussions. What did I do now? Let's see how this plays out in terms of modern poskim. What do modern poskim make of all this? Rav Pinchas Teitz was originally from Eastern Europe, but after the Holocaust, he settled in North America, in the United States, and he was one of the principal rabbis in North America after the Holocaust period. Now, he got into a lot of hot water because he gave daily Gemara Shiurim. He taught the Daf Yomi. He taught daily Shiurim in Gemara on the radio. And he would broadcast his Shiurim on the radio. When I was a boy living in New York, there was one radio station that had Jewish broadcasting, and he had a half-hour program a day, teaching the Daf Yomi, teaching a page of Gemara. And this got him into a lot of hot water. Many Jews, many rabbis objected strongly to that, because when teaching Gemara on the radio, non-Jews could listen. And he was teaching not only a Jewish audience on the radio, but non-Jews as well. This has nothing specifically to do with Leil HaSeder. We're just talking now about the issue of teaching non-Jews Torah. Hine, these are the words of Rav Teitz. Hine etzem ha'isur l'lamed Torah la'akamu baro pashut. It's simple and straightforward, perfectly clear that it is prohibited to teach non-Jews Torah. This requires no further explanation. The sources are legion. Ma she'ororani lachkor hu rak ho'il v'alimud hu al yedei tachanat radio. But when I teach Gemara on the radio, rak b'nei Yisrael regilim lahakshiv. Most of the listeners are Jews. My intention is to teach Jews who will listen to my radio broadcasts. Halimud hu be'ikar b'shvil Yisrael. My principal reason for teaching Gemara on the radio is for the Jewish audience. Now, I know perfectly well that non-Jews could listen. Is that something I should be concerned about? Hilidili, my source in this matter upon which I rely, is in the Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Palestinian Talmud. It says there, in the Palestinian Talmud, in the Talmud Yerushalmi, it says, Ha'eved oleh leminyan shiva. Slaves count as one of the 7 aliyot l'Torah, which are required every Shabbos. Every Shabbos, the reading of the Torah requires at least 7 people to be called and pronounce the blessings on the Torah. And in those days, whoever got the aliyah would actually read from the Torah as well. Well, who qualifies to get an aliyah? The Yerushalmi says flat out, among others, avadim, slaves, can get an aliyah. Now, of course, the position of slavery in Jewish society, the attitude of rabbis to the institution of slavery, that deserves a whole separate series of shiurim, which we're not going to get into now. We're just going to learn one detail from this Yerushalmi. A slave can be called to read from the Torah. Lokein amar Rav Chama bar Ukva, b'shem Reb Yossi, bei Reb Chanina. And other rabbis disagree. Other rabbis disagree and say, no, you cannot call a slave to read from the Torah. Asur lilamed avdo Torah, because it's prohibited to teach slaves Torah. Well, that's an interesting idea which deserves a long discussion in the context of rabbinic attitudes towards slavery. Tipater shalamad me'elav, o shalimdu rabo ketevi. Well, it's okay. There are two kosher ways. There are two satisfactory ways that a slave can learn Torah. He might teach himself. Well, if the slave taught himself, no one was guilty of teaching the slave Torah, and all is well. Now, the slave is an educated Torah Jew and can get an aliyah to the Torah. Or the other way that a slave might become educated in rabbinics, in Torah Judaism, is like Tevi. Tevi was a slave of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had a slave whose name was Tevi. And Rabbi Akiva frequently in the Gemara, in the Mishnah and in the Gemara, praises his slave Tevi as being a great Talmud Chacham, as being a great rabbinic scholar. Perish Corbin Ada, one of the two principal commentaries on the Talmud Yerushalmi, says, Kisheha Rabbi Gamliel milamed ibahachamim, when Rabbi Gamliel used to teach Torah, Shama Tevi Avdo, Tevi the slave listened to the Shiurim, and halachically speaking, that means that the slave taught himself. The teacher, the Rebbe, was teaching a Jewish audience. The person you're not allowed to teach Torah to, the slave, was just listening, and therefore, halachically speaking, had the status of teaching himself. The Rabbi Gamliel did not stop teaching, did not silence himself and refrain from continuing with the shiur when he saw that Tevi, the slave, was listening. And in the modern context, when I am teaching Jews Torah over the radio, Iker halimud hu b'shvil Yisrael. The reason I'm teaching is to teach Jews Torah, and if there are any non-Jews listening, they're learning Torah by themselves. I am not teaching them, and all is well. It follows, therefore, that if there are non-Jews present in Leil HaSeder, you can say Divrei Torah, you can teach Torah at Leil HaSeder, intending to educate the Jews around the table, that the non-Jew hears and is also educated in Torah matters. Well, that has the status of the non-Jew learning by himself or learning by herself, and all is well. Bottom line, no objection to having the non-Jew present in Leil HaSeder. I just point out in passing, I remember listening to those shiurim when I was younger. They were in Yiddish. It strikes me as being fairly unlikely that any non-Jews were learning Gemara by listening to Rav Pinchas Teitz teach Torah, teach Gemara in Yiddish over the radio. But what do I know? Maybe some did speak Yiddish. Let's take a look at the approach of Rav Moshe Feinstein in Igrot Moshe. Rav Moshe Feinstein was surely the greatest of the Rabbanim in North America in the post-Shoah, in the post-Holocaust period. He writes, B'dvar Chag Pesach, when Pesach comes around, Kishetavo Habaita WebYeshiva, and he's addressing this to a Yeshiva Bacher. A Yeshiva Talmud asked him what to do. When I go home for Leil HaSeder to my parents, when you go home to Leil HaSeder by your parents, Timtza Sham Gam Krovcha V'Ishto Shi Nochris. When you go home for Leil HaSeder, one of your relatives is going to be present at Leil HaSeder, and he has a non-Jewish wife. There's going to be a non-Jewish person at Leil HaSeder when you go home for Pesach. Well, Atatitz Terech Lagid Haggadah Uletargama, you, the Yeshiva Bacher, is going to be expected to explain the Haggadah in Leil HaSeder, and you're going to be teaching Torah to the assembled family members and whatever other guests are there, including this non-Jewish person who married one of your relatives. Well, Memela tishma gam hi, hayim mutar. This non-Jewish woman is going to hear your divrei Torah. Are you allowed to speak? Hine pashit, it's obvious, la'ani adati, in my humble opinion. Tumash amar Rabbi Ami, what Rav Ami said in the Gemara, Ein Mosrim Divrei Torah la'akum, when Rav Ami said in the Gemara, you're not allowed to teach Torah to akum, to idolaters, when the Gemara prohibits teaching Torah to idolaters, hu dafka kishakavanato lemosrim la'akum, that's only if your intention is to teach idolaters. אבל כשכוונת הלומד דברי תורה הוא ללמדם בעצמו למוסרם ליהודים הנמצאים שם. But if your kavana, if your intention is to teach Torah to the Jews who are present, there's no prohibition just because a non-Jew happens to also be present and is listening. We see that the Igros Moshe, Rav Moshe Feinstein, and Rav Pinchas Teitz, two great rabbis, that's what other people argue about who was the greater of the two, two of the great rabbis of North America in the post-Holocaust period are in perfect agreement that if your intention is to teach Jews, the presence of non-Jews is irrelevant and all is well. And the Igros Moshe, Rav Moshe Feinstein, independently brings the same proof to the acceptability of teaching non-Jews together with Jews, brings the same proof that Rav Teitz had brought from the case of Tevi the slave. He was a great rabbinic scholar, and we can, of course, rely upon that story as well. Hayu Hachamim Lomdim Mefalpolim, the rabbinic scholars were studying Torah in the Beis Midrash. Tevi the slave happened to be there as well. Tevi the slave paid attention to what the rabbinic scholars were saying in the Beis Midrash, and he too became a great rabbinic scholar. Rav Moshe Feinstein continues and concludes, Alma de Kevan Shekavanatam Haita Lelamed Batzmam, since the intention of the rabbinic scholars in the Beis Midrash back in the late antiquity was to teach Jews Torah, the presence of Tevi the slave did not stop them from speaking, did not stop them from teaching, and, well, that's no different than having a non-Jew in the audience nowadays when you are teaching Torah. Lo ne'esru, afshi yadusha, Tevi hu avdosha. They knew that Tevi was there. They knew that Tevi was learning Torah from what they said, and all is well. Mistaber shekein hu gam kein ba'akum sha'isu hu rak shekavnato limsor la'akum. The whole prohibition of teaching Torah to non-Jews applies only when your intention is to teach the idolaters. Aval, kisha limud hu l'Yisrael. But if you're teaching Jews, and the non-Jews happen to also hear, no problem at all. Teda, further you have to know, shayayin sheyiga bo yesu. There's another problem here, aside from the issue of the teaching Torah, and that's the issue of the wine and the grape juice. I'm going to leave this issue aside and come back to it in a few minutes when we'll talk about it in greater detail. What do we have so far? Two great rabbis, Rav Pinchas Teitz and Rav Moshe Feinstein, in agreement that if your kavanah, your intention, is to teach Jews Torah, then if non-Jews happen to be listening and learn Torah as well, no problem at all. Let's continue our survey of the opinions of the great poskim and see whether other great contemporary rabbis fall in line with this thinking. The Abia Omer, written by Rav Ovadia Yosef, he was the chief Sephardic rabbi here in Eretz Yisrael, amongst the greatest of the Sephardic authorities of modern times. Let's let other people argue about who exactly is the greatest Sephardic authority of modern times, but he's on anyone's short list of being among the greatest. Perhaps he was the greatest. In any event, he wrote as follows: B'Shelat U'Shavot Be'er I found in a sefer, She'ein Mosrim Divrei Torah La'akum, Hainu Razei Torah V'Sodoteha. I found in the sefer, and he gives the exact reference, that the whole prohibition of teaching Torah to non-Jews has to do with only the mystical secrets of Torah. After all, teaching Torah, studying Torah, divides into two components. There's Nigla and Nister. There's the simple, straightforward meaning of the Chumash, the Mishnah, the Gemara, Rambam, Rashi. That's Nigla, the simple, straightforward meaning, as opposed to the secrets of Chumash, the secret meaning, the esoteric and mystical meaning of the verses in the Torah, of the Mishnah, of the Gemara, and so forth and so on. The mystical, esoteric, secret meaning which we learn in our mystical works, our works of Kabbalah, like the Zohar HaKadosh, and the writings of the Arizal, the great mystic of Tzfat. It's those mystical ideas that we refrain from teaching non-Jews. Tana de Messiah line is a good proof for this in the writings of the Meiri. The Meiri is one of the great Rishonim, one of the most influential of the medieval authorities, one of the most influential of the Rishonim. The Meiri wrote, Ein Mosrim Sitrei Torah Elul Adam Hogun. It is in general prohibited to teach the secret, mystical, esoteric meaning of Torah to anyone, unless the disciple is worthy of study. It doesn't matter whether the disciple is Jewish or non-Jewish. The simple, straightforward, nigla meaning of Torah we teach to all Jews. The hidden, secret, mystical meaning we teach only to disciples who are worthy. And you must be very careful to evaluate your disciples and make sure they are worthy of learning the secrets of Torah. Ein Mosrim Sitrei Torah L'Goy, surely cannot teach the secret, mystical, Kabbalistic, esoteric meaning of Torah to non-Jews. V'hu misha oved avodah zarah. And he says flat out, I'm talking about idolaters. Of course, there are many non-Jews who are not idolaters, but if they're idolaters, then they are not worthy disciples, and you cannot teach them Kabbalah. You cannot teach them Jewish mysticism. Since the idolater is denying the very foundations of Torah, since the idolater is denying the very foundations of Torah and Judaism, there's no way to proceed in teaching them Kabbalah. And this is what is meant by the verse in Sefer Tehillim, in the book of Psalms, Magi Devarav Li'Yakov Chukav Mishpatim Li'Yisrael. We teach Torah and the laws of Torah to Yisrael. Lo asa kein l'chol goy. We do not do that to the other nations of the world. So the verse in Tehillim says flat out that the Torah is to be taught to Jews and not to the other nations of the world. And according to Rav Ovadia Yosef, all of this prohibition of teaching non-Jews is referring not to Perush Rashi al-Hatara, not to Mishnah, not to simple meaning of the Gemara, and so forth and so on. The prohibition of teaching Torah to non-Jews has to do with Kabbalistic ideas. And indeed, Kabbalistic ideas should not even be taught to Jewish disciples unless you're confident that that Jewish disciple is worthy. One last, similar, according to this, again, according to this, no objection to teaching Divrei Torah in Leil HaSeder, because you're not going to be teaching the Kabbalistic secret meaning of the Haggadah, as long as you're teaching Nigla, the revealed meaning, and not the secret meaning, not the Kabbalistic meaning of the Haggadah. All is well, even if non-Jews are present and listening to what you say. A final opinion, as far as this is concerned, is the Sridiesh. Sridiesh was written by one of the great rabbis in Europe before the Holocaust. Rav Yechiel Michal Epstein was his name. Yeah, he was among other things one of the great Rosh Yeshivas in Europe. He was Rosh Yeshiva in Berlin at the time when the Nazis came into power. Um, he survived the Holocaust, and after the Holocaust, he lived in Switzerland, in the Romandy part of Switzerland, in a town. Name of the town is Montreux, where he lived. When he escaped, most of his writings, most of his notes, almost everything he wrote had been confiscated and destroyed by the Nazis. Only small amounts of his writings survived the Holocaust, and that's why he calls his sefer Sridiesh, the remnants that remain from the fire, the remnants of my writings, which I was able to preserve, which I was able to save. In any event, I said before his name was Epstein. I think I made a mistake. His name was Weinberg. Rabbi Yechiel Michal Weinberg was his name. He was not only one of the all-time great Rosh Yeshiva, he was not only one of the great Rosh Yeshivas, he was also one of the world's greatest biblical scholars. Indeed, he worked very closely together with Paul Kala, who was the professor of biblical literature in the University of Gießen. And those two worked together on biblical scholarship. He was a master. There's the Sridiesh. The Rosh Yeshiva was a master of all the ancient languages of the Near East and a master of all the literature of the Near East in all its various languages. And as far as biblical scholarship is concerned, he was right up there with the greats. And since he was working as a colleague of Paul Kala, the great professor of biblical, non-Jewish professor of biblical scholars in the University of Gießen, he was offered a job to become a professor of Bible at the University of Gießen. And this is a job offer which he rejected. When he rejected the job offer, many of the Jews in Europe thought that the reason he rejected the offer was because he didn't want to get himself into a situation where he would be teaching non-Jews Torah. And he wrote the following tshuva to explain the real reason why he rejected the job offer. These are his words. Hine b'Rambam, the Rambam says as follows. These are the words of the Rambam. Akum ha'osek b'Torah chayev misa. Non-Jews should not study Torah. And indeed, there's nothing worse than non-Jews studying Torah. It's as though they should be put to death. Then the Rambam adds, Klalo shel davar. This is the rule. Ein manichim otam lechadesh dat. We do not want the non-Jews to invent their own religion. La'asot mitzvot la'atzman midatam. We do not want them to invent their own mitzvot. Ella, Oshiyeh ger tzedek. Rather, non-Jews have a choice. If they wish, they can convert to Judaism and be full-fledged Jews. Yikabel kol mitzvahs, and then they will be accepting all of the mitzvahs upon themselves, and they will be as Jewish as you or me. That's one choice they have, full conversion. Oh, ya'amod b'torato v'lo yosif v'lo yigra. Alternatively, they can follow the 7 mitzvot of Bnei Noach and be satisfied with that. But we don't want them to create a new religion where they're not Jewish, but they do put mezuzot on their doorposts. We don't want them to invent a new religion where they're not Jewish, but they do read from the Torah once a week and call people up for aliyot. We don't want them to imitate parts of our religion because we want them either to be full-fledged Jews or to follow the 7 principles of Noah. Well, that's why we should not teach them Torah, because if you teach them all about the halachot, of how to write a mezuzah, and all the details of how to put a mezuzah on your doorpost, they might start doing that. And now they're just imitating the Jewish religion, which is all a fraud. And we don't want them to do that. Yotzei Medvarav, it follows, therefore, the Sri Rav Weinberg wrote, Ha'isa hu rak ba'osa l'shem mitzvah. The prohibition of teaching Torah to non-Jews is if the non-Jews want to imitate our religion. They want to put mezuzot on their doorpost. They want to blow the shofar on New Year's Day. If they want to imitate our religion, no. Either convert or follow the 7 ethical principles of Noach, the B'nai Noach, the Noahides. Mitkaven l'chadesh dat. What we don't want to do is teach them Torah so they will invent a new religion which is neither Judaism nor anything else, but just half-baked ideas. If the non-Jew is learning Torah because he loves wisdom, if the non-Jew is learning Torah because she is intellectual and wants to understand the religion of the Jews, I'm not going to do it myself, I just want to understand the Jewish religion, lahakir Toratam. If the non-Jew just wants to know what the religion of the Jews is, all is well, and there's no prohibition. The prohibition, according to the Sri of teaching non-Jews Torah, as the Sri understands the words of the Rambam, is teaching them Torah that they want to observe, that they want to embrace, they don't want to be Jewish, but they do want to learn the halachas of shofar, to make sure that they blow the shofar in the halachically correct way. They don't want to be Jewish, but they want mezuzot on their doorposts. That's what's wrong, according to the Rambam, and therefore that's not at all the reason that I rejected the offer of being a professor of biblical literature at the University of Gießen. The reason I rejected the job, he wrote, is I prefer to devote my time and energy to being Rosh Yeshiva in Berlin. He continued as a Rosh Yeshiva in Berlin until the Nazis closed his yeshiva, and he continued working together with Paul Kala in the University of Gießen on biblical research. The Nazis insisted that Paul Kala fire him because he was Jewish, but Kala refused to do so, and he continued his biblical research at the University of Gießen until the Nazis hauled him off, and he was not put into a concentration camp because he had a Polish passport as a Polish citizen, and therefore he was put in a prison over the Holocaust period. Conditions were not much better than a concentration. They were not as bad as a concentration camp, but pretty bad. He lost his health. He never really recovered his health afterwards. In any event, according to all of the approaches we've seen, no objection to teaching Torah at Leil HaSeder. Let's go on with the next issue, namely the wine. The rule is as follows. There are 2 categories of wine. Wine and grape juice are halachically identical. Wherever halacha calls for wine, for example, Kiddush, 4 cups, grape juice is equally acceptable, according to almost all the poskim. In any event, there are 2 distinct elements to understand here. Number 1, any idolater who has used wine or grape juice as a libation, as an offering to an idol, well, like anything else which gets offered to an idol, any offering to an idol is prohibited for us. If you're traveling in Southeast Asia and you see a non-Jew making an offering of a bowl of rice to an idol, which is not a rare thing in Southeast Asia, that rice is prohibited, and it's a Torah prohibition. Uh, uh, you're not likely to encounter much wine or grape juice, which was offered to an idol, which was poured on on an altar somewhere. You're not likely to encounter much of that, so it's unlikely that you're going to encounter this Torah prohibition. On the other hand, any wine or grape juice which is handled by a non-Jew becomes prohibited, not because of idolatry. Here we're talking now about a rabbinic prohibition, not a Torah prohibition of idolatry. The rabbinic prohibition of any wine or grape juice handled by non-Jews has nothing to do with idolatry, has to do with, in the words of the Gemara, benotehem, asru yenam mishum benotehem, the reason the rabbis back in the days of the Sanhedrin prohibited wine and grape juice handled by non-Jews is in order to prevent intermarriage. Although social interaction with non-Jews is perfectly acceptable, no reason to refrain from going to the office party where you work to celebrate a new contract or whatever it is they're celebrating in the office party. Social interaction is perfectly acceptable. You can go you can go bowling with your colleagues from work, but in the midst of social interaction with the non-Jews, the rabbis back in the days of the Sanhedrin wished to introduce a simple prohibition to remind you that although social interaction is perfectly acceptable, it should not lead to intermarriage. And therefore, when you finish bowling or you're at the office party celebrating, and you are offered something to drink, and you have a choice between wine or beer, you have to think for a moment and say, I'm not allowed to drink the wine, even if it's kosher wine with a great hechsher and comes from Israel, because the wine has now been handled by the non-Jews. I'll take a bottle of beer, please, instead. That's what the rabbis of the Sanhedrin wanted. Therefore, if you have a non-Jew at the table, and a non-Jew handles the bottle or has handled the cup of wine, imagine that the non-Jew has the cup of wine, handles the wine, now puts the cup down, the wine in that cup is prohibited. If you pour from the bottle into that cup, the wine in the cup is prohibited. The stream of wine connects the wine in the cup to the wine in the bottle. Now everything in the bottle is prohibited as well. The wine in the bottle becomes prohibited not only if the non-Jew picks it up and handles it, but even if you just pour it into a cup which the non-Jew is holding, or which has wine, previously had some drops of wine in it, which the non-Jew had handled. Now the wine going into the cup is connected by a stream to the wine in the bottle. All is prohibited. That's a problem. The Shulchan Aruch says, Misha hirtiach al gabe eish, if you boil the wine or the grape juice, it becomes immune to non-Jewish handling. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Therefore, if you're going to have non-Jews at Leil HaSeder, it would be wise to cook your wine or cook your grape juice, to boil it before Leil HaSeder, so that it will be immune to the prohibition of non-Jewish handling. According to Rav Moshe Feinstein in the Igrot Moshe, Mistaber ani dati, it seems in my humble opinion, he says, what does cooking mean when we say cooked wine is immune to non-Jewish handling? Of course, if the wine was prohibited before before cooking, if a non-Jew handles the wine, it's prohibited. Subsequent cooking will not permit the wine. But if the wine was permitted at the time of cooking, then subsequent handling by a non-Jew will not prohibit the wine. How hot does the wine have to be cooked in order to eliminate the problem of handling by a non-Jew? According to Igros Moshe, Yad Soletedbo, if you heat the wine to the temperature that your hand would burn, you could not keep your hand in the hot wine because it's simply too hot. You would have to take your hand out. That's the minimal definition of cooking. Shi'ur diyitma'et midato. This means that there's going to be evaporation and the volume of the wine will reduce. You'll have less wine because there'll be some evaporation when you've heated the wine to this temperature, and therefore that is sufficient. When we talk about cooking wine, what we mean is heating it to the temperature of Yad Soletitbo. Now, ordinary pasteurization, which is a very common process, not only in wine, but in any food which is going to be packaged in an airtight container, pasteurization is above this temperature. Pasteurization just means heating the food and killing the germs, killing the bad guys which are in there, the microorganisms. Pasteurization is exactly the same as heating the food considerably above the temperature of Yad Soletitbo, the temperature that would burn your hand, and therefore, according to this, ordinary pasteurization is sufficient to make the wine immune to non-Jewish handling. Now, cheaper wine in the market today is usually pasteurized. The better quality wine in the markets today is usually not pasteurized. According to the law in the state of Israel, and as in every other Western country, I'm sure, the health regulations require that anything packaged in an airtight container be biologically sterile. The worst pathogens, the ones that kill you in a few minutes, the worst pathogens grow in an oxygen-free environment. Anaerobically, it's called anaerobic microorganisms. The worst one, botulism, which will kill you in minutes, thrive in oxygen-free environments, and therefore the law requires that anything which is going to be tinned, anything which is going to be canned, anything which is going to be bottled in a airtight container, no oxygen, must be biologically sterile before the container is sealed. Well, the simplest way to do this is by pasteurization, but the better quality wines are not pasteurized. The better quality wines undergo microfiltration through a ceramic filter where the microfiltration is fine enough to even remove viruses, which are very, very tiny, even to remove viruses from the wine. That's the better quality wine. So in Israel today, if you buy Carmel wine, which I think is the biggest winery in Israel today, every bottle of pasteurized wine says on it, mivushal, cooked. Every bottle of non-pasteurized wine which was made sterile through microfiltration, has on the bottle the words lo mivushal, not cooked. Other companies might not use exactly this terminology, and indeed other companies might not have any mention on the label about whether or not the wine is cooked, but that can be verified by consulting whoever gives the hechsher, whoever gives the rabbinic supervision to the bottle of wine will be able to verify very quickly whether the wine has been pasteurized or not. If pasteurized, according to the Igros Moshe, no problem at all if Jews subsequently handle it. Therefore, in Leil HaSeder, you would be well advised to take pasteurized wine. As far as grape juice is concerned, as far as I know, every brand of grape juice on the markets today, both in Israel and abroad, as far as I know, every brand of kosher grape juice today has been pasteurized before bottling. I'm pretty sure I would know if there's some brand of grape juice out there which is not pasteurized. So grape juice is, according to the Igros Moshe, not a problem. If you have non-Jews at Leil HaSeder, wine, either buy a pasteurized wine or heat the wine yourself before before Leil HaSeder. That's the approach of the Igros Moshe. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the greatest, or one of the greatest rabbis in Israel in the 20th century, disagreed with this approach. And he held that cooking wine to the temperature of Yad Saledbo, he held that heating wine in pasteurization is insufficient cooking. That's not the definition of that's not the definition of cooking. The definition of cooking is mishahir tiach ala eish. You need a rolling boil. Only really boiling the wine, bubbles, really rolling boil, that is what will make the wine immune from handling by non-Jews. And that's a much higher temperature, boiling temperatures, slightly over 100 degrees centigrade. You get the boiling point elevation, depending upon the molarity of the wine. Much stricter than the approach of the Igros Moshe. According to this, even pasteurized wines, if handled by non-Jews, become prohibited. This is a machloket which continues to exist today amongst major rabbis all over the world. The majority view, the mainstream view, is in accord with the more lenient opinion of the Igros Moshe. Pasteurization is sufficient. Those who are following the stricter view and insisting on a rolling boil in order to make the wine or grape juice immune from non-Jewish handling, well, I could be sympathetic with people who are following the stricter view. I can smile upon them. I will surely not mock them. I will surely not consider them foolish for following the stricter opinion. After all, it was the opinion of the great Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was, if not the greatest, surely one of the greatest of the rabbis in Eretz Yisrael. He continues and says, Yesh lefakpek tuva bekula de pistur. Moshe Feinstein, who relies upon simple pasteurization for the wine, it's very, great. I don't think that's right. After all, he says, pasteurized wine tastes exactly the same as non-pasteurized wine. The pasteurization process done industrially today in modern wineries does not noticeably change the taste of the wine. And the whole purpose of cooking the wine is to make it different from ordinary wine because of the whole origin of the prohibition. One should not be drinking the same kind of wine as the non-Jews drink at events of social interaction. Now, that Moshe Feinstein thought that pasteurized wine is fundamentally different and therefore permitted, and the Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach on the screen before us thinks you can't detect the difference, you can't taste the difference between pasteurized wine and regular wine. This is, of course, something which is subject to simple testing. Some people have finer sense of taste. Some people are not very sensitive to small differences in taste. And indeed, many people, including myself, I think, I can tell at the first sip whether or not the wine has been pasteurized or not. Other people are not so sensitive to different tastes and are just not aware, just not sensitive to the difference between pasteurized and unpasteurized. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, was insensitive to the difference in taste between pasteurized and unpasteurized wine. Therefore, he held only a rolling boil, which will seriously change the taste, is acceptable. Igros Moshe, who was more sensitive to small changes in taste, he held that simple pasteurization is sufficient. Okay, we've covered the issue of teaching non-Jews Torah at Leil HaSeder. We've covered the issue of the wine and the grape juice. The last issue for this evening is the issue of cooking for non-Jews on Yom Tov. On Shabbos, of course, you're not allowed to cook. And therefore, there's no worry that if you invite a non-Jew to a Shabbos meal, of course you're not going to be cooking for the non-Jew. You don't do any cooking at all on Shabbos, and therefore no problem. But on Yom Tov, where cooking is permitted on Yom Tov in order to do the mitzvah of eating a Yom Tov meal. That means meal which is going to be eaten by Jews, which means it is prohibited to cook on Yom Tov for non-Jews. If non-Jews are going to eat the food, you're not allowed to cook for them on Yom Tov. You're only allowed to cook for Jews. And therefore, uh, the rabbis prohibited inviting non-Jews to a meal on Yom Tov. On Shabbos, no objection to inviting non-Jews. There's no way you're going to cook for them. You're not allowed to cook for anyone on Shabbos. But on Yom Tov, when you are allowed to cook, the rabbis in the Sanhedrin were afraid that if you would invite non-Jews, you might be cooking for them as well. You might not cook everything in advance. You might cook on Yom Tov, and that's prohibited. Therefore, they prohibited inviting non-Jews to any meal on any Yom Tov, and that includes Leil HaSeder. Let's see what the texts have to say about this. The Shulchan Aruch says, "Ein mevashlim l'tzorach kutim b'Yom Tov." One cannot cook for non-Jews on Yom Tov. Lefichach, therefore, asur lahazmino. Therefore, you're not allowed to invite non-Jews lest you come to cook for them on Yom Tov. The Mishnah Brura says, "Afilu yihiyeh lo al yedei zeh." Even if the non-Jews will come to hate you because you do not invite them. You have a Jewish relative married to a non-Jew. If you refuse to invite them for Yom Tov, then they might come to hate you. Even if this will lead to hatred, you're not allowed to invite a non-Jew to a Yom Tov meal. Asur. Imlo she'inyan nogeh lebitul simchas yontif. The only room for leniency is simchas yontif if inviting that couple, one of which is Jewish, one of which is not, if inviting that couple is important for your simchas yontif, for your rejoicing on the holiday, that would be a basis for leniency. Therefore, I would advise as follows. If you have a Jewish friend, a Jewish relative, a Jewish person who is married to a non-Jew, and you wish to invite them as a couple to a Yom Tov meal, and let's say it is a Yom Tov meal, my advice is don't invite them. Simply follow the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch and do not invite them. Instead, you can say something like, we're going to be eating at such and such a time, and of course we'll be happy to see you at the meal. Well, you see, I didn't actually extend an invitation. I merely said that we're going to be eating at such and such a time, and of course I'll be happy if they show up. The prohibition is to invite the non-Jew. If you make it clear that the non-Jew's presence is fine, and you will embrace the non-Jew's presence at the meal on Yom Tov, and you haven't actually invited that person, all is well. And then, of course, you must be careful to make sure that all the food was cooked in advance, and you're not actually going to be cooking for the non-Jew on Yom Tov, on Pesach or any other Yom Tov. That would be a simple, straightforward solution to that problem. So we've seen that teaching Torah in general is not going to be an issue. We've seen a simple, straightforward way of eliminating the problems of non-Jews handling or touching the wine in Leil HaSeder, or any other meal which involves wine. And we've seen a solution to the problem of inviting non-Jews to a Yom Tov meal, including Leil HaSeder. I'm going to pause at this point and wish you a good week and a safe week, and eventually a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Yes, of course you can plan for the non-Jew who has allergies or certain food preferences. Of course you can plan to make the menu suitable for the non-Jew who has allergies or food preferences. Yes, that's okay.
Rabbi.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Baruch Tehillah.